You're listening to Peterborough's community radio, Salam Radio. Salam Radio, 106.2 FM.
Hello and welcome to the Midwifery Insights show that myself and Lisa do. Just a reminder, Lisa, we are now live at Salam Radio. We want to welcome all of our listeners who are out there listening to us either live or if you plan to listen in later. I want to also remind you that you're listening to myself, Faiza, and I've got the lovely Lisa Marie here, and we are both practicing midwives and we work for Raham Project. So if you are listening and you want to get in touch with us, just a reminder to say that you can either call or text in on the show at 01733 602 133, or you can email us on info@salamradio.co.uk. They also have this playing on their Facebook page, and we will share it on our Raham Project Facebook page, so you can listen in on there. Now, today is a very exciting show for us because Lisa and me were kind of thinking, what do we want to talk about on this session? And something that comes up quite often is the conversation around being a mother and balancing being a mother and being a working mother. So we thought we want to discuss being a working mother live on this show for you all to listen to. Now, nothing that we're going to say is actually advice. It's our insight as working mothers and people who work a lot with mothers in our community. So a little bit about the concept of working mothers in the UK. We definitely know that it gained significant traction in the latter half of the 20th century, and there was a huge shift because of lots of factors. World War II saw a surge in women entering the workforce to fill wartime vacancies, and following the war, many women didn't return back to looking after the home. It's probably partly because they got the taste of financial independence and feeling like they were contributing to society, possibly flared up a desire to want to continue doing that. We know that around that time there was a huge growth in the feminist movement as well. So this probably also influenced why lots of women started to want to work outside of the home. Now, all of these factors did technically chip away at the expectation of women solely as being homemakers. Would you agree, Lisa?
Absolutely. I certainly, from my own perspective, I didn't really feel there was a choice but to continue working when I was pregnant, when I had finished my maternity leave. But I also wanted to work, which is really valuable to me. I enjoyed my work. I continue to enjoy my work, and it's part of my identity as well. So I didn't want to lose that when I became a mum.
That's so interesting. Can I share some of my experiences of being a working mum? So I actually felt I had a huge amount of cultural expectation on me when I became a mother, and suddenly I had to balance the expectation of being the homemaker and the nurturer and the carer with my desires of wanting to be a working mum. And honestly and truthfully speaking, when I had my children, I did not understand how you work and you raise kids. I mean, I've done it, and I still always wonder, how do people actually do it? Because emotionally, I found it very, very challenging. And it's probably still not the norm in our communities, because probably women of my mum's generation, they weren't working women quite in the same way as, say, me as a second generation British Asian is. Mm-hmm. So tell me a bit more about your experience as a working mum, and how did that all go down?
Well, it's also been very challenging, and I completely appreciate what you say about I don't know how people do it, because you just fly through it really without really thinking about it. And I think for me, particularly where there isn't a choice, I don't reflect on that because I have to continue working and finding that balance. It's hard, it's definitely challenging. Finding opportunities to have really good quality time with my children. Maternity leave was a great start though. That that was really, really valuable for me. So having that time off of work so that I could nurture my children, get things off to a great start, really build that kind of bonding and attachment, so that when I returned to work, we had that really good emotional bond. And finding someone that would look after my children whilst both myself and my husband were working, that we trusted, was really important to us.
Sounds really interesting. So out of curiosity, explain to me, how long were you off with maternity leave with your children? How does it work in the UK regarding maternity leave, Lisa?
So maternity leave in the UK, you are entitled, if you're an employee, you're entitled up to 52 weeks of maternity leave. And there's certain requirements about when you inform your employer as to when you plan to take your maternity leave and when all that kicks in. Legally, you must take at least 2 weeks or 4 weeks if you work in a factory. But you can take as much of that 52 weeks or as little of that as you want, as long as you take that initial requirement. I took longer actually for my second child. For my first child, I was back to work after about 9 months. That was a financial requirement really, and I went straight back into work full time, which was really, really tough. So I applied for flexible working hours so that I had the opportunity to work part time, which was great. With my second child, I took about 15 months off in total, but that required some saving and some good financial backing so that I received additional money. So you are entitled to maternity pay or maternity allowance in some circumstances. That really depends on whether you're an employee, the type of contract you have. I don't know the ins and outs of it. I know it from experience. And I also know, based on my background, I used to work in advice work, so I have some kind of insight into it. But there's some incredible organisations out there that will tell you what your rights are, because not many people know that they've got a right to take time off, even during pregnancy for certain things as well. So in pregnancy, if you are an employee, you're entitled to paid time off for antenatal care. You're entitled to maternity leave and maternity pay or maternity allowance. And then you're also entitled to protection against unfair treatment, discrimination or dismissal, which I'm sure has a big impact. What are your thoughts on that, Faiza? Do you think people know about those rights?
So I don't think we do always know what our legal rights are, particularly as women. We know that women from our communities face a combination of racial and gender discrimination. We know that this can potentially lead to them receiving lower wages. They're less likely to advance in their career and get the opportunities as somebody who doesn't have children. And just a general lack of understanding of the mother's needs. Once you become a mother, your needs change. I don't think there's enough of an awareness within our community of that, and also within employment when it comes to our diverse communities. The other thing I want to just touch on is, within our communities, we have quite set gender roles. And within Black and Brown communities particularly, there is a much higher emphasis given to mothers being the primary caregivers to their children. And when you have to match that with your desires to possibly want to work and contribute to the society, those expectations can be a bit hard to conform towards. I would also say regarding childcare, because it sounds like you really found somebody that was the right person to look after your children. Usually we would probably tend to use family members more so than even a friend. It's very important we keep that circle around the children, people who we want it to be, and our first option is usually family. Now that could be well-meaning family who might not even have the skills to look after a child, but there's the psychological safety that there's a relationship, so they might be the right people. But this means that we can often not be able to afford high quality childcare. We go for what we know out of our nurturing and our cultural expectation, as opposed to thinking what else is actually out there. And I guess it probably goes hand in hand. There might be good childcare out there, but if you're a working mum and your income is much lower and you're trying to manage in this cost of living crisis, which lots of families are struggling with, how do you manage paying for that sort of thing?
Sometimes it's a real balance, certainly with the mums that I work with. Actually, it's a real balance trying to find somebody who you trust to care for your child, and childminders. So there's childminders, there are nurseries that take children from a young age, from kind of 6 weeks perhaps. It's finding the right setting, but also earning enough money to pay for that and to justify that balance, because a lot of mums I speak to have said, but everything I'm earning is going straight out on childcare, because childcare has gone up, the costs have really increased. And I used part and part, so I used my family plus childcare, so I split it, so I had a bit of a balance there, which was important to me. But I can imagine that if you have the expectation that your children go with your family, perhaps for people that might not be the right thing, how do you then step away from that and say, actually, I think I'm going to put my children into childcare? That in itself must be challenging.
It's quite a daunting thing to do. I mean, even sending my children to preschool was something that took a big thought process. I was not ready to leave my children. Nobody in my family ever left their children. I'm from that first generation of women that's really been working in employed contracted roles. And so I really had to look around and see which preschool felt like the right preschool for me. But I cannot deny that there was comments about, oh, so you're going to work whilst you have children? It's really not the done thing. And who's going to raise the kids? And having the mum there is very important, which is absolutely true. And we will talk a bit about that, because having the mum there is important for children. But I guess what I'm learning in the real world is there's demands of raising a family. And maybe when we're younger, we're a bit more oblivious to the fact that our parents are picking up quite a lot to give us that security and that balance. And it's only when you step up into that adult responsibility that you recognise somebody was fixing that boiler when it went wrong, and somebody was paying for the heating, and somebody was paying for the mortgage. Like, who was doing that? And now you're the parent and you've got to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's pressure on dads as well. Whatever the family makeup is, and whatever decisions that you reach as a couple, they have to be mutual, and you have to work on that together, and you have to agree together, because otherwise it's going to be difficult to move that forward with your family. What your experiences of finding that kind of solution as a working mum and that balance with your family life as well?
I think a lot of it came down to having good communication with my husband. I think there was absolutely a realistic awareness that when you are the person who carries the child, breastfeeds the child, has the child, that instinctually things change for you. Biologically things change for you. And there's something about your biology that is screaming at you, stay with your baby, keep your baby next to you, don't put it far away from you, stay close to your baby. So I really felt that shift. That door opened in my brain, and I very much wanted to be close to my children. And as I reached that 1 year mark, I do remember thinking, how am I going to navigate leaving my children? And then, Lisa, I was doing 12-hour shifts. And this is where I really struggled working full-time with a young baby. Doing 12-hour shifts felt like I was just away from my children for such a long period of time. And I guess through conversation with my husband, we ended up navigating it. That I went back when my son was probably about 15 months old. By that time, I was pregnant with my daughter. So I wasn't really working for that long between them before I went on maternity leave again. But I definitely found it challenging leaving my children for such a long period of time. So if you're a shift worker, my heart very much goes out to you. But what we ended up doing was I ended up working night shifts. So my son, by that point, started sleeping through the night for a period of time. He still wakes up, for anyone who's listening out there. Your children don't sleep through the night, as the books and the resources that you're reading out there tells you.
That's another show, Faiza.
That's another show, a lack of sleep or that parents experience. But I found doing night shifts gave me a really good balance, because I could go to work whilst my kids were sleeping, and they loved like co-sleeping with me and their dad. So if they were sleeping with their dad, it worked very well for us. And by the time I was back in the morning, back home in the morning, they were ready for like a feed, and then I could just lull and sleep during the day. But I found it challenging. The lack of sleep for me as a then pregnant mum and a 1-year-old child was not very easy. So I can't say I'd encourage it, but again, life then meant we needed a bit more of an income, and we had to balance what felt right for us at that point of time. And I guess that's what we did. And I think that's important for people listening, isn't it? What works for one person doesn't always work for someone else. And sometimes when you explain your scenario to well-meaning people, they may not get the depth of what you're actually going through. What's your thoughts on that, Lisa?
Yes, I think family and friends can offer lots of advice, well-meaning advice. The best bit of advice I ever had, actually, from one of my closest friends who may be listening, when I had my first child, was if somebody gives you a piece of advice, smile, say thank you, and then go away and do exactly what you want. So I do appreciate that people will give you advice along the way, and it can impact and influence your decisions. And some of your decisions might not be the right ones in the long run, but in the short term, you kind of have to make a decision that feels right for you and your family. And things can change. They can always change. And certainly as a working mother, you have rights as well. You are protected by the law. Fathers have the right to paternity leave and paternity pay as well in certain circumstances. So I think it's really important to remember that actually you are balanced with those rights, as well as making the decision that is kind of fits for your family. I think listening to you sharing your experience, Faiza, I feel quite exhausted. Just the thought of working 12-hour shifts whilst being pregnant with a young baby at home. And the thing that popped into my mind was I remembered expressing my milk when I was working, and that was very challenging. So whilst I was, again, with breastfeeding and going back to work, if you're breastfeeding for 6 months, 12 months, 4 years, as I breastfed my second child, you need to find that opportunity perhaps to express your milk whilst at work. And you're protected by the law, and your employer must provide you with somewhere private, somewhere hygienic, somewhere to store your milk, and even that opportunity to lie down if you need to. And I do know of local companies, mums have shared their experiences where an entire room has been created for a mother who was returning to work breastfeeding, and that is almost her legacy, that she has left that with that company, a very, very big local company. So there's protections. Did you breastfeed, Faiza, whilst you were working, and how did you find that?
So yes, I did breastfeed both of my children. With my son, because I was pregnant, he recognised I was pregnant, and my milk completely changed, and he just decided one day he didn't want it. And at the time I didn't realise I was pregnant. And you know, they say that your milk changes. It's not as sweet when you become pregnant, it becomes more salty. So when my son started rejecting my milk after never wanting to stop breastfeeding, I vividly remember thinking, what is going on? And so I did a pregnancy test and found out I was pregnant with my daughter. And so when I went back to work, it was really useful working in maternity. There was breast pumps everywhere. There was places to store your milk everywhere. So in that regard, it was really lovely being a mum with a young baby. I guess the challenges are when you work in the NHS, we know that there's constraints, there's staff shortages. So it's finding the time to be able to leave and take time out for yourself, where we don't always get regular breaks or a break to then stop to have time to just express. It wasn't always easy, but my body needed me to do that. So I became a bit more demanding, I would say. I just kept reminding it, I've got to go and I've got to pump. And they were really good at facilitating. I just had to remind them that I really do need to go. Thank you very much.
But that's a great example of you exercising your rights, but because you needed to, and finding that balance. I was in a similar situation. I returned to work as a community midwife, and I started pumping and storing my milk, and that was fine. And then suddenly I was running out of time because I had a busy caseload and I had lots of visits to do, and it was challenging to fit it in. And it wasn't through lack of trying and lack of support from my managers and my colleagues. So I ended up stopping pumping completely and shifting my body so that I fed all through the night. So my body ended up stopping producing milk during the day. By the time I got home, I was ready to feed my child a lot. So that kind of continued whilst I was breastfeeding for that entire period.
You know, it's interesting because you've said that, and it has just reminded me. I remember going through that stage where I decided I'm going to stop expressing because finding time to fit it in wasn't always easy. And I remember a very similar thing happened to my body. It just adapted eventually. Now, I want to just touch a little bit more about rights, Lisa. So you mentioned how long mothers are entitled to in the UK, and men can have up to 2 years paternity leave. So 2 weeks, not years. Goodness, years would be amazing. 2 weeks of paternity leave. Is that the case in other parts of the world?
It's variable across the world as to who is entitled to what. Interestingly, I know the United States, their maternity leave is nowhere near as good as here in the UK. But if you switch it to Sweden, I believe, they have fantastic maternity leave. Now, they have introduced shared parental leave in the UK, whereby a mother and a father can share the maternity leave between them. So let's say you decide to take 52 weeks maternity leave. The mother, in theory, could take 6 months maternity leave, and the father could take the other 6 months. I don't think it's quite as easy and black and white as it sounds, but in theory it's there as an option.
Right. I've not known many people to do that in the UK, although I do know in like Sweden and countries like that, they share paternity leave over a 3-year period, and that seems to work really well for their children. And I do want to get onto this in a minute, the need for children and mums and that early year of the bonding and why that's important. But we'll stick to rights for the moment. What about families when they are asylum seekers or refugees and they don't have like a status of a British citizenship? Does it work differently for them? Because we're such a diverse community, right? And I know I care for lots of families that don't have a legal status of being British, or they're in the process of getting that.
Yeah, absolutely. Things do change and shift a little bit. I am absolutely no expert. I would definitely like at this point to direct people to an organisation called Maternity Action, who have lots of information about this. Certainly in terms of rights through pregnancy as an employee, I believe they are unchanged. If you are classified as an employee, you are entitled to these rights. Things shift a little bit when you are self-employed as well. Certainly NHS care when you are pregnant, that's something that I would quite like to touch on, because thinking about that, there are a lot of women who will receive a letter through the post saying you now have to pay for your NHS care because they are not what is classed as ordinarily resident in the UK. Now that means that you are settled in the UK, whether that's for a short term or a long term. So for example, somebody who I believe has refugee or asylum seeker status will be entitled to NHS care. Like I say, ins and outs of that, I don't know those 100%, but I do know that you cannot be refused maternity care in the UK. If you are asked to pay for it and you have no means to pay for it, they cannot refuse to give you maternity care. So that then becomes an issue between the hospital that is providing the care and the person who is receiving the care. It's not down to me and you as midwives to say, no, I'm sorry, but you can't have your care because you can't prove to me that you've paid for it. So that then becomes between those two people. And again, there's rights. You don't have to pay for it all up front, and it's split down in terms of different types of services that you receive. But for example, if you go to A&E and you are not admitted as an inpatient, that is a non-chargeable service from the NHS, so you wouldn't have to pay for that.
And on that note, Lisa, thank you so much for sharing that insight with us. I'm just letting people who are listening know that we are going to be going on a break. So if you are interested in this conversation where we're talking about being working mums, please know that you can reach out to us. You can either call or message in. How you do that is you call or text on 01733 602 133. You can email us on info@salamradio.co.uk or comment on the Facebook thread, which is on Salam Radio or Raham Project. Please do come back in a few seconds. We're going to carry on talking about being working mums in the UK.
You're listening to Salam Radio, and it's now time for Zohar Azan. This Azan is sponsored by UK Islamic Mission, serving humanity since 1962.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم، وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم في العالمين إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وابعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته. اللهم آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم بك نحيا وبك نموت وإليك المصير. رضينا بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم نبيا ورسولا.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد النبي
This is Salam Radio, Peterborough's Muslim community radio. Broadcasting on 106.2 FM and online.
Hello and welcome back to Salam Radio 106.2 FM. You are listening to Faiza and Lisa Marie from Raham Project, and we are your local midwives sharing midwifery insight with you. So today we are talking about being working mums. We would love it if you wanted to share your experiences with us by calling or texting on 01733 602 133 or email us on info@salamradio.co.uk. You can comment on the Facebook thread at Salam Radio and also our Raham Project Facebook page. Now, we've been talking a lot about our cultures, how becoming working mums became integrated into the UK, and also around our rights, Lisa. Let's have a conversation moving forward about being a working mother and what is the need of our babies and us when we first have children. What are the benefits of being at home with our baby or leaving to go to work? What's more advantageous?
Wow, I think everyone's going to come from a different point of view on this, based on their culture, based on their own upbringing, based on their belief system, based on what they can manage themselves. You know, what are their choices within their own circumstances. I think what do your babies need? Your babies need you. They need your love. They need your focus. They need your attention. They need stimulation. And all of this we know helps their brain develop. So if you take mother out of that setting, then there has to be somebody else in the mother's place that is able to provide that for the baby, which could be the father, could be a family member, or it could be somebody in a childcare setting.
That's such a good point you raised, because we know that there is lots of work happening talking about this mother-infant relationship. And we know that babies, whilst they're in our womb, they recognize us, they recognize their mothers, they'll recognize people that the mother's been around. And the mother-baby relationship starts well before the baby is actually born. Now, that being said, a baby's love language is very much having closeness, comfort, touch, because they can't articulate how they're feeling. I mean, they might cry, but generally their love language is keep me close, keep me warm, let me please feed from you.
I know that I'm safe.
I know that I'm safe if you do that. So really there's something in keeping babies close to their mums. And we know that the earlier a child stays close to its mother, and for the longer period of time it stays close to its mother, it picks up on how to navigate society and its own social life when it's older. It gets like a blueprint by watching that primary caregiver. And I guess also when I care for mums, Lisa, in labour and after they've given birth, they always say, oh my God, that was so hard, but I'm so glad I did it for you. I think it's supposed to be hard because when they become teenagers, you can't give them back as much as you might want to at times. I think there's a reason why biologically we're drawn to keep our babies close to us, and our babies want to be close to us because we're essentially creating that blueprint, right, of what a healthy relationship looks like. And that's important, right?
Of course it is. And I think I hear everything you're saying and I can feel myself almost bristling inside, because I wanted to be able to do that and I wanted to have that provision for my children. So trying to find the ability to do that whilst working was hard, and the times that I was separated from my children were difficult, be that through work, be that through going to other family things. I remember vividly both my children, the first times that I was away from them overnight. Will never forget that. And you're drawn to them, and even thinking about the first time I remember my second child, the first time my husband took her out and away from me to give me some rest and some peace, I'd called him within 45 minutes. I want my baby back. Bring my baby back. This is only, she was only a couple of days old. so we are tuned for that need to be with our babies. And I think I would have loved nothing more than to be with them for all that time. But actually there is still that part of me that has grown up in a culture. So my culture was to grow up, to work, to develop a career, to be a provider for my family that I would eventually create. And that's a tough balance now. It is.
I hear so much of what you're saying. I think it is a tough balance. And I guess as I'm getting older and I'm raising my own children, I wonder if what the old age saying of my community was of having set roles, responsibilities, that in some ways it was protecting that space for me as a mother. I completely understand that there are people who probably have been in circumstances where they wanted to and they weren't allowed to. For me, where I came from a very nurturing family, I'm kind of glad that pressure was not on me. What put the pressure on me was actually the Western standard of what mothers should do. Mm-hmm. So going to university, getting a degree, getting a job, having the financial independence, it just added these layers of, well, if I'm not doing that whilst I'm raising my children, then clearly I'm not doing it as I should do it. But really, when you become a mum, if and when you can, it's ideal that you do stay close to your baby, and that if you can, just lull in that space and give yourself grace for the period of time that you are with your baby, because you're not going to be there like that forever.
How did you do that, Faiza? Have you got any tips, practical advice, ways that you can continue building that connection with your baby if you are not there all the time with them?
So I would say, I'm going to speak as somebody who went back to work when my children were over a year old. I am not going to comment on if it's under a year, because I think that's really tough. I mean, I can only speak from my experience, but I wouldn't have known how to balance getting to 6 months, trying to figure out a child who still has loads of needs, and their needs are constantly changing, because at that stage they start actively teething, or they start wanting to wean, or you want to try different foods, and trying to balance all of those new things you have to learn must be very difficult. But how I balanced it with my 15-month-old baby was, I would make time where I could just be with him after work, where sometimes I just sat and I cuddled him. And I think I did that instinctively, because when babies are born, we do this thing called biological nurturing, which is where you put a baby upright on a mother's body. Often it happens straight after birth. And if you keep a baby close like that to a mother, the baby will root and start looking for milk, or eventually settle, because it knows it can hear its mother's heartbeat, and it will settle. And I found that connection was really important for me. And as my children have become older, I feel like the connection is more important for me sometimes than maybe it was for them then. For me, it's become a thing of, I grew into them and they kind of grew into me. And now I'm experiencing another stage, which is now they're becoming so independent, and I need to figure out, where do I sit as a mum in all of that? So I think that constant contact was really useful. I also found, because my children had a bit more communication then, explaining to them, oh, mummy's going to go, give them a kiss, leave, and then coming back and knowing that I'm coming back. So it's kind of like I'd start planting the seed that I'm going to go, but I'm going to come back. This person is going to be the person that's going to be with you. Usually it was their dad or their grandparents. But mummy's definitely coming back. But I do vividly remember those times when they were very young, and like say they started preschool at the age of 2.5, and when I left them, and then I'd come back, even if it was after 3-4 hours, just the way their face would light up when they saw you. And it was a really nice feeling. And I'm quite guilty of sometimes scrolling through Instagram And it does tug up my heart sometimes when they show those videos of cute little like toddlers at nursery, and then they see their parents, and then the parents get so sad that they left them, and the kid gets so happy. And I think, oh my God, that's how much impact you have on a child. The moment they see you, like, you are their world, really, aren't you?
You absolutely are. And I think no matter what you do, if you've created that solid foundation in those early years, early months, like you say, even from pregnancy, you're building that connection all the time, and nothing's going to change that you are their world, and they will always come back to you, and they will always snuggle into that love.
And added on to that, Lisa, actually, what starts to change is how you possibly communicate that love. Whereas initially it's very physical, it's a huge physical demand on you. As they start to develop their brains and they start to articulate their emotions and their thoughts and their feelings, it becomes a more kind of thought through relationship. There's a deeper awareness of what they're starting to feel, and they can explain to you. So one of my child didn't actually speak much until they got a bit older. And when I first left, they were not that bothered when I was going, or I thought they weren't. But by the time they got older and they could communicate, they started saying, "Mummy, don't go." And I remember thinking, oh dear Lord, stop saying that to me, please. It's really difficult leaving you. Mm-hmm. It did feel like very much like somebody was pulling a band-aid off me. Mm-hmm. I wasn't ready. I didn't feel ready. Circumstances were that I did. And so my heart really goes out to all mums, because on the flip side, Lisa, I speak to mums who are stay at home, and to be fair, I've adapted my life completely so that I can be there for my children, as have you, as all mothers do, right? Our lives change when we have our children. But I like to listen to stay at home mums, and they experience a different sort of pressure and guilt, kind of like life's moving on and I'm stuck at home with the children and I'm not doing anything, even though you are doing the biggest thing that you can be doing. What are your thoughts about that?
I hear that completely, and I think that's the part that I identify with, the kind of need to do something away from my children as well. That's always been there. And I think for those mums that are experiencing that, I would say go out and do things as far as you can. Sometimes you're going to have to take your children with you, but actually go and connect with other people that are experiencing the same thing as you, and meeting other mums and having that opportunity to be a little bit more sociable. And then you might then start developing and doing things that are just for you. And as your child grows, you will be already in that space and already be ready to go and do things that are for you. Perhaps when your child starts preschool or school, you'll be there. Certainly it's something that we've seen with some of our volunteers at Raham Project, who are absolutely incredible, and they have grown with Raham Project, and it's something you've been watching people, haven't you, as they've developed, and the phase that they are in life, they're ready to move on to the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I was just thinking of all of the people that work with us, and partly why I think we have such amazing women that support us is because we are happy to work with them as mothers. And that is a crucial thing. Once you become a mum, everything kind of factors in around that, doesn't it, where you can. And I believe Raham Project's really good at doing that. We recognise that. And we've actually got a lot of our volunteers who are from diverse communities, Lisa, who raise their children, and now their children are a bit older and they want to get involved and they want to do something for themselves. And I hear this a lot. I've raised my kids now, Faiza, and I want to do it for myself. I want to do something that, makes me feel like me. And there is a sense of identity loss when we can have our children and become mothers.
Is it identity loss though, or is it identity shift?
Good point. Maybe it is a shift. I think with your first one, the shift feels quite deep, because with the first one, you don't know how to be a mother. You're learning so much on the go. Whereas when you have subsequent babies, Lisa, would you agree that it happens more easily because you now have the role of being a mother. You don't have to relearn being a mum again.
Yeah, you've established a pattern almost, and another part of your identity.
Yeah, and in some ways, actually, women, once they have children, whether they're at stay-at-home mums or whether they are working mums, I see them manage life in a completely different way to what I was managing life before I had children.
Oh, absolutely. It's a juggle. I mean, when we were talking about how we manage work and raising children, we didn't even touch on how we manage the home as homemakers as well. And that's another job in itself.
It really is. And I'm sure I've read somewhere that being a homemaker is like the equivalent of 2.5 employees or something crazy like that. And I believe it because it feels like it.
Every day.
Lucy is so funny. So tell me this then. How can mothers who are working then share that responsibility and the workload off when they have got young children?
I think they need a support network, don't they? That can be... For me, I have different people in my life that provide different kinds of support. So I've got people that provide practical support, I've got people that provide emotional support, I've got people that I'll go to with different things because they have their own life experiences. I'm lucky that my friends their children are older, so they've all been through it a little bit before me. So I go to them for advice and guidance and then hope that I can pass that forward onto my friends that have got children that are a bit younger than mine are.
That's so important because actually having social support, strong social networks and support, either your family, your friends or your community, it can provide a lot of emotional support for us when we are raising children. And actually I'm one of the eldest in my family having children, so I was one of the first. So therefore I feel like I was learning a lot on the go, and I've probably given an example, hopefully a good one, to my siblings of how you can try to balance raising children. But social support is so important. Actually, in that sense, I would say our community is really good on relationships. So our diverse communities are very good on relationships. And my son actually calls my older sister Ammi. Ammi translates to mother in my mother tongue. So he calls me mum and he calls her Ammi. All the children now call her Ammi Sabah. She's listening. So that's how like embedded it is that, you know, if you're an aunt, a maternal aunt especially, they're the best kind of aunts. You kind of take on the secondary role of parenting, and there is this real sense of comfort when my sisters are around where I can relax with my children. And I know that if they do something, they will try to parent them in a similar sort of way that I think I'd quite like to parent. So that has been quite nice, and that's been very enjoyable. There are other things actually that people can look at for support though, Lisa, can't they? Because you mentioned workplace flexibility. If you do go back to work and you're managing having children, you can get flexible working contracts.
Absolutely. So again, if you are classed as an employee by law and you've been working for your employer for 26 weeks, you can make a flexible working request. And what that means is it's a change to your shift pattern. So for example, where I said I went back to work full time initially with my first child, I then put in a flexible working request to turn my role into a part-time role. Actually, an employer doesn't have to grant you flexible working. It has to meet the needs of the business. So really it's about making a strong case. It's not saying that you will do full-time work in part-time hours, but it's making a strong case. And typically you can get some support with that. So again, organisations like I've mentioned, such as Maternity Action, they have templates, tips and advice on how to make a flexible working request. And there's another organisation, a community interest company like Rahan Project, they're called pregnant then screwed.
Oh, yeah.
And they really give you lots of information about your rights as a working mum and tips and advice. And both organisations have got helplines, so if you're unsure, you can pick the phone up, you can ask, well what are my rights, how do I go about this, my employer said no, now what do I do, can I still push for something?
That's amazing. And also I just remembered something when I was working in Northampton. They used to have on-site childcare support.
Yes.
And some employers, I know in the NHS, this is something that they seem to support, where they have access to providers that will look after your children whilst you work. And in Northampton, it was right on site next to the maternity hospital. So is this a thing across the board for the whole of the NHS, do you know?
No, it's not, sadly. It's still something that is childcare, that is payable, that is still bound by certain hours. The thing that shift workers find challenging is having somebody that can have your child from before you start your shift, so 6:30 in the morning. That's not particularly easy, if at all easy, to find. So then you really need to work with your partner, your family, to try and make the balance. But it's not something that happens, you haven't got the childcare settings in every hospital. It's very much, like I say, an independent, private, that happens to be on site and have a bit of a working relationship with the employer.
And another resource for working mums out there is knowing that there's a lot of psychological well-being support resources out there. And even when you work for a particular employer, if you are struggling with your emotional mental well-being, that they have policies and they have things in place that can support you. Do you know much about them, Lisa?
Yes, absolutely. Again, NHS typically has really good systems in place, and private employers often have connections and links to wellbeing organisations that could perhaps provide counselling. In some situations you might find support for your physical health, like physiotherapy as well, as an example. It depends on what your employer has. And for some people who are employed through an agency, for example, perhaps on 0 hours contracts, this is where things can become quite difficult. If you're not in a set contract of employment, it can change your rights a little bit. Again, having a look at maternity action would be a great way to find out more, but still there's some protection and still there's options and flexibilities. I think, what's your thoughts on people being comfortable speaking to their employers about what their rights are, or even telling their employer that they're pregnant because they're afraid of discrimination or dismissal because of pregnancy or being a mother?
It's not unheard of, is it? Hence why we have stuff like maternity action and then pregnant and screwed sort of groups that have been created where mums have struggled with workplace discrimination. So it's definitely not uncommon that the moment you start having children, that we'll hear stories even amongst our social circles that, oh, I didn't get that promotion and they found out I was pregnant, and you wonder, is there a link? Was it because she's not going to be around for the next, I don't know, couple of months or not? So I would say, yeah, I do think there is a link, Lisa, sometimes.
Yeah, and it's having the courage to speak up as well, and to inform yourself so that you know where you stand before you go and speak to your employer.
That's something I now know really well, whereas when I first had my children, I didn't know that very well. And I think it's partly because, you know, I got to the level I got to and I didn't need to know that information. So I just assumed my employer would tell me everything. And it was a long journey of learning, and I'm still learning. Listening to this, I've been thinking, wow, I wish I'd known that before, that there are rights that you have and this is where you can go for the information. So I'm assuming there's more women out there that probably don't always know what rights they actually have around their support package after they've had a baby. So I would actually say, in hindsight, if I could go back and do one thing, I would have asked more questions. I would have wanted to know the processes. You know, how does it work? How do you get paid? How does statutory pay work? How much do you get paid?
£184 and 3 pence, I believe, at the moment, per week.
Is that from 6 months onwards?
That's for maternity pay, that's 90% of your earnings for the first 6 weeks, and then £184.03 for 33 weeks afterwards, or 90% if it's lower than that value.
And then you have a period of time where you don't get any maternity allowance, but you can have the time off.
But you can have the time off, that's correct.
That happens around the 9-month mark.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay. Yeah. So that information for somebody who wants to plan financially, you need to know that beforehand.
You do. You really do.
Absolutely right, Lisa. On that note, we are coming to an end. The hour has gone so quick. I really hope the people that have been listening have found this really useful, because I have learnt so much from you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing all of that. Just letting everybody know that we come every other Monday, and we want you to join in. So if there's any topics that you'd like us to discuss, please message us either directly at Rahan Project or let Salam Radio know, and they will reach out to us. But if there's anything that we've spoken about and you want to call or text, remember it's 01733 602 133, and you can email us on info@salamradio.co.uk. Please comment on the Facebook thread at Salam Radio and on our Rahan Project page. I'm also going to let you know, if you're listening, that we've got some really exciting guests lined up that we can't wait for you to listen to in the future. So keep your ears open, and we will inshallah speak to you all soon. Take care. Bye bye.
Stay tuned to Salam.